Okay, can anybody hear me? Let me bring up the Q&A, or actually the chat. Okay, so that's good. Let's just go and get my PowerPoints up. I think we're good to go. So sorry about that, guys. I tried to do something that I hadn't tested and my other laptop wasn't up to the task. So let me just check the YouTube recording to see if that's back up and going. And let's just see. Yep, that looks like it's right. Okay, just let me check the audio here and see. That's that, and that's that. I got the video turned off and yep, okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Basically, this is my Azure DevOps pipeline tips and tricks for Azure integration services. This is the same talk I gave at Ignite Tour. I just renamed it a little bit because basically I didn't, it works out more as a tips and tricks talk. So basically, next. So we're going to talk a bit about Azure integration. We're going to talk about the integration services, the Key Vault, Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps pipelines, and a little bit of summary at the end. So with integration services, basically, this is again, like I spoke in the keynote, that the logic apps, service bus, API management, event grid, functions, and kind of Key Vault kind of make up for me what the integration services are. So basically, they're the pieces that we have to do when we want to integrate. And again, one of the issues we find with customers is that they you get a situation where a customer wants to buy a single product, but the way integration services are, it's basically using the different pieces of Azure. Now, one of the reasons I gave you those names out beside each one of those is that if we're doing deployment with ARM templates, those are the names that we need to look for. So it's Microsoft.logic, Microsoft.servicebus, Microsoft.API management, Microsoft.eventgrid, Microsoft Web, and then the Key Vault. And now I'm sure that a lot of people are a little surprised about Key Vault being in there. And basically, what I want to do is talk a bit about Key Vault, because I have started using Key Vault as a key part of my Azure deployments. And basically, like the top line says, it's not just for secrets, keys, and certificates. It's more for detailing, I think, information about the particular environment that I'm working in, so that basically we can look at a Key Vault in an environment and tell where everything's at. So what I do is I create a Key Vault for each environment. So this could be dev, test, UAT, prod, depending on which mix that you have in Azure. And then basically, and this could be used from non-Azure too, because basically you can access Key Vault pretty much over the web. And what I do is I put all the service names and things like that into Key Vault, but what I do is I give them a content type of text plane. And what I do, I have a set of PowerShell that I use to inject these values into my Azure DevOps pipeline. So with my secrets and connection strings and things, they're in Key Vault the same, but they don't have the content type of text plane. So the only thing that my PowerShell will publish in clear text is anything that is text plain. So you won't expose any of your secrets and your connection strings and things like that. One other thing that is not as easy to determine is that there is high availability inside of Key Vault. So it's not evident from the outside. I read some documentation and found some documentation on it. And basically what it is that the Key Vault will come up in the other data center in your region if that region fails. So that means that it's automatically getting replicated to the other data center in your region. So if I've got it set up in Australia Southeast, it'll come up in Australia East. Same name, same values, all of that stuff. So this goes to a few things that I've seen recently in network diagrams that basically they show Key Vault in both data centers in the region, and they have some kind of convoluted method to basically sync those secrets between the Key Vaults in the region. And again, I ran across a blog post or a tweet about somebody showing off how to do that syncing. So it's probably not necessary. Okay, so what I do is, this is an example. This is basically when I've deployed something, I've got API management. So I put the IP address of API management in there because I'm going to need that later on in my deployment when I deploy my functions, because I want to lock those functions so that they only accept calls from API management. I might need the name of the API management instance. So if I'm deploying my function API into API management, I need that for part of the connection. The App Insights instrumentation key, I need to basically put that in as configuration to most everything else. The App Insights name, I might need Key Vault names there, but you really can't get to Key Vault without knowing the name of it. Log Analytics, I have a SQL admin connection string, a SQL client connection string. You'll notice they still show up as starred because basically they are protected still, because I don't want to expose those. Now the SQL admin logon, it looks like it's a password, but it's not. It's just that I want to make the user unique. So basically I've just got some unique characters on the end of the tour admin. And my admin password there is protected and all of those. So, and then my SQL name down there, I've got the partial name and the full name of that. So this is the reason I do this, is that I like to have the ability to be able to go to an environment, go to Key Vault. If I have access, I can go and find all of this information from Key Vault. That means that I can split my deployment process up into many pieces. So I can deploy, I typically have a common deployment, which is Key Vault, API management, application insights, log analytics, those kind of things that I only need to do once. But then later on, I might have multiple databases that I need to do. In this particular case, I think I put the database in this one, but if I had a situation where they're going to have multiple databases, they can then just go out, use this PowerShell to inject that stuff into the pipeline and be able to find out where all of these pieces are at. So we'll go on a little bit to the DevOps side of things. And basically, this is an interesting one, and I've run into a lot of customers lately, and I'm just not sure why. They've gone off and they've decided they're going to use Bitbucket for the source for the Git repositories. They're using Jira, which basically it reminds me a little bit of the old saying when I was in the mainframe days, nobody ever got fired for using IBM. But basically, it's typically what everybody thinks, we need Jira. For most people, most developers, you can do exactly the same thing you're going to do in Azure DevOps with the work items and things like that. One of the things I do want to bring to most people's attention is that I've seen is that the Azure DevOps is made up of team projects. Each team project will have one TFVC repository, but it can have multiple Git repositories. And I think that most people should be using one team project with multiple Git repositories, because basically that team project is where you control who's working on what, your work items, your work planning, your sprint planning, and things like that. But you don't want to lump all of the source into one repository. Ran across a client doing that recently, and basically they had such a convoluted build process to build the one that changed. But basically you have one team project, multiple Git repositories under that team project. Now the pipelines, you can use either, the build pipeline can either be classic or YAML. I'm old school still. I haven't made the convert to YAML. I can see that in most cases, there's probably a good reason to use YAML on one-off projects. What I'm yet to figure out is whether YAML fits well with a situation where you've got a lot of the same build and deployment process for your different artifacts and using YAML. I did learn something today about the YAML templates, which is good. I need to go have a look at that, because typically I use the classic the UI, and I use task groups. And so basically what I do is I parameterize the task groups so that I basically supply the information I need and it builds the same. That is especially because most of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment is around BizTalk, and they all build and deploy the same way. Release works the same way. I can have the classic or YAML. With the classic, I can have the task groups, things like that. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know and don't use around Azure DevOps is the artifact store. And basically this artifact store will do two things for us. It will cache our packages. So it'll cache our NuGet packages and Maven and NPM packages so that they're closer to my build. But it also has a universal package store, which allows you to put pretty much anything in there. And what I'm doing with it is I'm actually putting any kind of deployment helpers, typically PowerShell, into universal packages. That also gives me the ability to version them. And it also prevents, when I'm using multiple Git repositories, from having to do funky stuff with the artifact source for things. Because what I can do is I can have them in the universal package, I can add a universal package download to my build or my release that will bring down that PowerShell, put it into the folder structure of my deployment, and then be able to use that in there. And then that way I don't have to have it in each repository. Because again, if I start replicating it in each repository, if I need to change it, I got to go change it a dozen different places, which is not really what I want to do. So that's one of the things that I would look at if you haven't looked at it, is that artifact store. They changed the licensing on that a little while ago. It used to be a per user license. Now it is a how much data you're using. So if you don't want to pay anything for it, turn off the caching, because you get the first 2 gigabytes for free, and then you start paying, and it's like a couple of dollars per 10 gigabytes. So it's not going to break the bank in terms of how much you're spending on it. So that is good. So let's go and basically have a quick look at the Azure artifacts. And I will apologize now because I know that I've got this browser stuff all screwed up at the moment. So let's go to my BizTalk Build Visual Studio. And now I've just figured out what the echo is for. I had 2 microphones hooked up. Okay, I apologize. So we'll go in here to the Ignite tour, go down and look at the artifacts. And what we'll see is we've got my PowerShell helper, and basically it tells you how to get that out. Basically, you can look at the different versions that are in there. So I got 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and basically then I can use those in my pipeline. So if I go here and look at my pipeline, this is the pipeline that actually creates them. So if I edit that quickly and have a look, you'll see that I basically do a universal publish. That's all that this build is doing. And it basically takes the, gets the source from the PowerShell repository and then publishes it out with a version. Then when I want to use that, if I go to my release pipeline and then basically go in here and hit edit and go into my job, you'll see that I have a deployment there, and then there's my PowerShell. But what I've done is I've got a task group for injecting those variables. So if we go look at the task group, so there's an inject PowerShell variables, and we'll see that it does a universal download. And I can, in here, pick what version I want. This is one of the things that wasn't in the product to start with, was the versioning. And so now you can do star and get the latest version. You can do 1.star and get all the latest version 1. You can do 1.2.star, or you can do 1 or 2, whichever you want to do there. So basically that gives you, if we go back and look at one of the release pipelines, this is one of the base ones. And we look here, you'll see that it breaks those out. So there's my universal download. And we go down through here, and basically I had debug turned on, but basically it downloads that package and it downloads it. I did a command line script just so you could see what it was doing. So basically what it does is it creates a folder PowerShell. Inside of that PowerShell shell, there's my inject Key Vault PowerShell. And basically then the rest of the artifacts that from that deployment. And then it basically executes that PowerShell. And if we go down at the bottom of this, this is where I took that screenshot from. And basically here it is. So basically the API management API, all of those kind of things get injected into the DevOps pipeline. So then when I'm doing the next piece where I'm actually deploying a something that needs those variables, it can get them from that. So that's basically allowing me to leverage the values that are in Key Vault inside of my pipeline. Now, you could do that with a library. And I will tell you, so if you create a new variable group and you can basically link it to Key Vault. The problem that I had with that is that it put them all out as secrets. And what that means is that they all had the three little little asterisks, and DevOps didn't really like that well. It had some issues with that because I ended up with the 3 little stars in the middle of my file, my names and things like that. So I ended up with my own PowerShell. Okay, back to the slides. So how can I deploy different things in Azure? So I could do the really unautomated way. I could go into the Azure portal, go create my test environment, my UAT environment, my prod environment. And early on in Azure, I will admit that there's multiple times that we did it this way before we decided to do some automation and some DevOps work. We went out and created the individual ones. And there, you could use the management APIs. I have ran into a couple of customers that spent time writing against the management APIs so they could deploy things into the different environments with different names, things like that. To me, that is way too hard, doing at API level. ARM templates, they are complex, but they are full featured. As we heard earlier when we were talking about the AGL story, they use ARM templates, but they also use a combination of Terraform, and there is a new one called Plumie. So it depends on what you want to standardize on. The biggest issue is, as was mentioned earlier, is that there is some issues on timing. So if they come out with a new feature in ARM templates, it takes it a little while to make it to Terraform. So those are that's the big issue there. Now, PowerShell, you could do it all in PowerShell also, but I'm not 100% a fan of PowerShell. I am forced to use it a lot, but I've had situations where I had stuff that I've copied from another environment. All of a sudden I go to run it and it doesn't work because they've changed the PowerShell a little bit, or the machine that I'm running it on doesn't have the right PowerShell installed. A lot of issues with that. So it does, to me, it is a little bit complex. Terraform, I kind of think that is basically, when I first started programming, I started in C++, but then when I started doing a fair bit of Visual Basic early on, because the rest of the developers in the group that I was working with didn't know C. So we did a bunch of Visual Basic development. To me, the Terraform is basically just a difference in language. So now if I was comparing language differences, it might be between C# and F#, something like that. That to me is the difference in the Terraform side of things. It's just a different way to do it. It does take a few less things to specify, and it's in the same type of language as YAML. And the ARM templates is programming in JSON, which is not the most fun you can have. So that's a big difference at that point. And Plumie, honestly, I have not looked at it. David O'Brien here in Melbourne has done a lot with Plumie. So if you really want to, reach out to him on Twitter and ask him about it. So with ARM templates, one of the easy way to get started is to export from the Azure portal. So you can go in, create your resource, go in there and hit export. They have fixed this functionality. Initially, when this was introduced to the portal, if you went into an individual resource, that the ARM template would export everything for that resource group, which became a little bit noisy if it was a resource group that contained a lot of things. Now, basically, when you go in to export the template, if you're in a particular service, say like you're in API management, it will only export those pieces from API management. You can also go into Visual Studio. There's some add-ins there that will allow you to download the ARM templates, particularly around the logic apps. You can create them from scratch. I've done that a little bit. I will point you to some references as we get a little bit further in here on some of the things that you can do in that. There are some built-in functions in the ARM template that will actually go off and get things like the in that application insights, the key, the storage keys, things like that. The name of the SQL, it'll actually go out and do that full naming pull of the name of the SQL instance. As you saw earlier too, you can have nested templates. In my examples, I've actually used the nested templates a little bit, because basically when I want to add secrets to Key Vault in a subsequent ARM template that I'm running, I use the nested template to go get back to my Key Vault to be able to do that. And again, the built-in functions help with retrieving the keys and the connection strings and building the connection strings and things like that. So again, I put most of that stuff in Key Vault, and then I can reference it from wherever I need to. So what I also do is I start with a base set of template variables. I've got a base name for what the application is. I have an environment prefix. Now, this can be used as a prefix or a suffix. And the example that I've got today is it's using as a suffix. And then I have an environment name so that I can basically tag things. And then I've got some environment type. And what this is for is that I say either production or non-production, because what I can do is I can use that flag to do conditional pieces in my ARM templates so that if it is a production environment, I know that I need to create a SQL server in a DR location, and then I need to establish a failover group so that my SQL can fail over to that other environment. Don't need to do that in most of my other environments. And then the environment tag and application tag is basically something that I can use to be able to look at the billing. So if it's dev, I can go pull all of the dev resources by their dev environment tag and basically look at some of that billing information. And then after the first of my templates, once my key vault's created, I always pass the key vault into the subsequent templates so that I know where the key vault's at. And that's one of those that I can't get key vault, the name of key vault from key vault, because I've got to know where I've got to go know the which key vault to use. So the Azure DevOps pipelines, and this is basically where a lot of the work really happens. And one of the things that a lot of people don't do with their ARM templates is build them. Okay, most people could just use their ARM templates for the actual deployment, but I actually go through a process where I build the ARM template. And what I mean by build is I run a validate on it. So in the ARM template piece of the build tasks, there is a validation only mode that will go and look at the ARM template, look at the variables, and make sure that everything's syntactically correct. Then I also use the universal packages for the PowerShell and things like that. And again, YAML, my kind of rule of thumb on YAML is one-off. With YAML, anything that might be a repeatable process that I need to do is classic with task groups. But I probably will revise that a little bit, and I'll go look at those templates for YAML. So let's go out and have a look at my build. So if we go in here and go to our pipelines, this used to be called build, but now it's called pipelines, but they just changed it. So I'll go in here and look at my base, and we'll hit edit. And what we'll see is there's using the Azure create or update a resource group. So what I've got is that I've got my subscription pulled. Let me just pull this over a little bit. Got my subscription in there. I've got a create or update resource group action. That could also be more around virtual machines if I wanted it to be. The resource group location, and where it's going to find the templates. They're linked artifacts. So out of my build directories. Then I do a override of the template parameters. If I click there, what it'll do, it'll show me all of the template parameters, and I can either put hard-coded values in there or use some build parameters. Most of the time, these are hard-coded. And then I've got validation only. And I have three choices on that. I've got incremental, complete, or validation only. Now, validation only basically doesn't do anything to your subscription. Incremental will just make the changes that are in your templates. Complete. I caused myself about a week's worth of work with complete. I ran complete against an existing resource group, and it went out and merrily deleted everything, expecting me to put it all back with my template. Not the most fun I've had. It was very educational. I won't do it again, but so basically I always use incremental. Now, this is where Terraform comes in a little bit different than ARM templates. Is Terraform maintains a state file so that it knows the state of all of the resources that it's working with. So where ARM templates, if the API management instance is there, it won't try to recreate it. But if you've changed some of the values, they may not get picked up. What I've found is certain ones do and certain ones don't. And I haven't really determined exactly what makes different ones be picked up. So, but typically what I'll do is if I know I'm changing major stuff in there, I'll probably delete it and recreate it. But basically, you want to use validation only in the build and then incremental in your actual release. And then the rest of these parameters are around kind of virtual machines. And then what I do is I take those ARM resources and copy them out as build artifacts. So again, I'm also now having the ability to be able to version these artifacts. So if all of a sudden I make some changes, I try to deploy them, it all fails because I've changed something that's not valid. It's syntactically correct, but doesn't work. I can actually go back to the previous one. Let me hop back to the slides now. So with our release pipelines, basically, we have variables, we have variable groups. So these are things where I can put other values like if it's an external URL I need to talk to, I can put it all in those. I can use Key Vault like I showed you. There is one of the most used tasks that I do in most of my releases is there is a replace token marketplace task. So basically that is, I use it to mark up my configuration files and things like that with typically a #, curly bracket, variable name, curly bracket. And basically it will go through those files with using the replace token task and basically go off and update them with what variables are in the pipeline. Very, very handy. I even use it sometimes to update my PowerShell. So if I need to add a policy to my API management, one of the first things I have to do in my PowerShell is to get the context of the instance of API management. So I will put those replaceables in my PowerShell, use the replace token to update the PowerShell. Again, universal packages to pull that PowerShell out, YAML for one-off, classics with a task group for repeatable processes. So let's go look at our release. So if I go look at my release pipeline and go edit one of these, and we'll see that I've got my dev, and then there's my resource deployment. Now, because this is the base one, it's the first one that happens, there's no use of injecting the variables. There won't be a key vault yet. But after I do that, I then inject the key vault. Then it goes through basically my directory where I've got some PowerShell and basically goes out and replaces those values, and then it executes that PowerShell. So we'll have a quick look at a second on that. Now, with the pipelines too, if I decide I want a test environment, I can just go here and clone my dev and change the variables, things like that. And again, if I go to create a release, it's going to offer me the most recent build, but as you can see, I can go back the different versions. And I use a build numbering strategy that has the first two levels of my application. So it's 1.0, and then it uses the Julian date. This kind of shows my age. I don't think I've really ran across Julian date that much. It's an old mainframe date format, which has the first two digits is the year. So 20, and then 045 is the 45th day of the year. This will stay inside of the boundaries because that third level of the build has to be less than 32,767. But then the release number is how many times I've done a build in that day. And then I can pick the different ones when I create a release, and then I can go off and run that. That means that all of a sudden I deploy one, it fails because of something. I go look at it and went, okay, I need to go back. I can go back if I need to and run the previous set of releases. If I was doing it inside and not doing a build and deploying those build artifacts, I would have to go back into my repository, maybe undo the commit, and then rerun the release using that earlier version from the commit. But I take the approach that I tend to try to not undo commits in my Git repository if I can help from it. So that's why when I use those, the builds and the build artifacts, I don't have to do that. I can then go into my repository, fix what I need to fix, save it as a new version, and then do the build again. Let me just check if there's any questions. No, no questions. So let me go to back to my slides. So I thought I was pretty close to being done. So basically, I tend to use Key Vault to basically do as much as I can in Key Vault to describe the environment. So that means I've got one place to look. I know that I can go to Key Vault, find the name of the SQL server. I can find the admin account of the SQL server. I am moving towards, on the SQL side of things, to using the AD authentication with SQL as opposed to a logon and password. But basically, as I move to that, that'll make that easier. I ran into a little bit of an issue that you can't use a SQL credentials to add Azure AD credentials to the database. So there's a little bit of fiddling you have to do in there. I'm working on a bit of a process around that. The big thing I think about the Azure DevOps is the repeatability of the process. I've gone into a couple of customers, I've put in the DevOps build and release, and what that ends up being is that next line. And I'm not sure if everybody's not coffee drinkers, you can substitute your favorite beverage for coffee, but basically you commit your code, that triggers a build. And if you've got a test environment that you want to deploy to, as soon as the build completes, it will then deploy to test and you can do your testing. So basically it's that repeatable process of commit code, go get a coffee, and then come back and do some testing. And in both cases of these customers, it went from taking developer resources of several hours each time they wanted to do a deployment to now the commit code, get a coffee, and test. So it's a much better process. I've even got one customer that a lot of the production deployments and things like that are done by the project managers after hours, so I don't have to stay around and I can be available remotely. I don't have to stay around for that kind of process. So again, what I've done is that will go here. Here is some references that are in the slides. And these are to the ARM templates for basically, this one is all of the ARM templates. And these are the Logic App, Service Bus, API Management, Event Grid, Web, and Key Vault. Now I'm going to quickly go over here and open this up and go to GitHub. And what I want to go to is, this is the breakout session I did in Sydney. And what I've done is I've actually put all of the artifacts that you've seen in this talk are in this repository. So if you want to go here, you can go look at the PowerShell. And it's not the world's biggest PowerShell, but this is the one that reads the secrets out of Key Vault, checks to see if their content type is plain text, and then writes them into the DevOps pipeline, either not as a secret or as a secret, depending on their content type. And then basically my other things that are in here are the build process and the task groups that I use in DevOps to do this are all in here. So that pretty much takes care of it, and it pretty much finished just about on time. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Oh, I just figured out what it's doing. Sorry, guys. I was clicking on one of the links. So let's open it up. Are there any questions? If not, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn on my webcam and see if I can, for some reason it will not. Oh, I'll stop sharing the screen and I'll move that away. And basically what I want to do is I want to say thanks to everyone for attending the online event today. Oh, I got something in the chat window. That must have been from earlier. Okay. But I want to thank everyone for attending the online event. And I know it was a little bit late notice to switch this over to an online event on Wednesday, but it was just in consideration for several people that I talked to that the risk of having a in-person event in the current state, because we didn't know exactly how that was going to play out. Probably in hindsight, we could have had the in-person event today, but we just didn't know what was going to happen. And a lot of companies were starting to get gun shy. I know a couple of them that I worked for. If you went to an event that had international participants, they wanted you to stay at home for 2 weeks and work from home. So I just didn't want to compromise anybody's ability to attend and put these over the an online session. And again, I think this is going to be the norm in the next couple of months because as this virus makes its way around the world, I know our MVP summit in a week, I was supposed to be leaving next Saturday to go to Seattle for the MVP summit. That's now an online event. Today, there was just an announcement for the Global Azure Bootcamp that, or not bootcamp anymore, just Global Azure, that will now be canceled. So watch the space though, because we will be looking at probably doing something like an online event like this we did today for the Global Azure, at least in the Australian time zone, because basically we can handle Auckland all the way to Perth and basically be able to get speakers from all of those different areas to join in to that. I will send an announcement out to the registration list of when the videos are up on the YouTube site. The live ones are out there now, but I'm going to clean them up and republish them out there to a different channel, and then I will put that out for everybody to consume if they've got other people in their organizations. And again, I think most of the speakers have put their contact details in their slide decks, which are available through the videos. And there'll be some of the speakers that will publish their slides out, and I'll let everybody know on that too. So I would like to thank again everybody for making this a successful online event. It's going to be something I think that we're going to see more and more of in the next couple of months. And if anybody really wants to have a look at how I've delivered this and the tools I'm using and the hardware I'm using, just basically drop me a line and we can go through it either online or in person. It doesn't matter to me, and go from there. So thank you very much. And that pretty much brings to an end today's Global Integration Bootcamp. Hopefully this time next year we can do an in-person Global Integration Bootcamp. But thank you very much again, and happy integration.